Okay, so I'm going to make a start pretty much now-ish. So thank you very much everyone for coming along today. Mark O'Connor will be coming in a minute and he'll also be talking, and at the end there'll be a joint question and answer session. So just a little bit of background about myself. I decided that I wanted to become a town planner because I thought that would be the most effective way that I could help the environmental crisis that we're facing. One thing that I've learned, and one thing that I've learned over time, is that town planning, as part of the solution to climate change, effective, sustainable town planning, is often overlooked. There are many, many great campaigns going on at the moment to try and deal with the climate crisis. But if we continue on the current trajectory that we are on, whereby we are increasing our suburban sprawl, eating into our food bowl, creating longer commutes, longer food miles in order to get our food as our food bowl decreases, increasing loss of biodiversity, because where we live, where our urban conurbations are also some of our most biologically diverse areas as well. So we really, really have to look at town planning. So I thought, well, I'm going to become a town planner and I'm going to change the world. And I had a really good degree, I had really progressive lecturers and they're really inspiring, and then I went into the industry and all of a sudden the reality of it all hit me. And I realized that we have a town planning system now that is so ingrained and so reliant upon the neoliberal paradigm that we're in, that it's very, very, very difficult to try and change this system from within. We have a situation whereby there's too much money and profit involved in keeping the status quo as it is. So we have this situation of suburban sprawl, and we have this situation of a lot of high-rise going up. So my job now is to try and get people to think about planning and start challenging some of the things we take for granted and start getting to the crux of the issue as to how we can create sustainable, meaningful communities as we progress to a world where we have to consume fewer resources and have a substantially lower carbon footprint. So this is where the permaculture comes in as well, because I've always been interested in permaculture, and then one day I met David Holmgren, the co-founder of Permaculture, on a train going from Melbourne up to Sydney, and I chatted. It was a long train journey, so we had a very long chat. And he started to break down some of the paradigms that I was thinking, oh, I'm a sustainable planner, I know everything, but then he was talking about all kinds of interesting things about how the outer suburbs can be retrofitted, how we can do this, how we can do that. And so I thought, well, we need to start imbuing permaculture principles into town planning. So I was thinking, well, what is the ideal kind of community? The ideal community is that we do have land to grow food in, that we do have walkable neighborhoods, that people do have the ability to catch a train, use public transport, you know, ride a bike. You know, the more boxes you can tick off, the more resilient and the more sustainable a community can become. So if you can walk to a train station, that's one box you can tick off. If you've got a community garden, that's another box you can tick off. You know, and on it goes. If you have a diversity of different types of housing so that people can upsize and downsize depending on where they are at their life, you know, then it means that people don't have to move out of communities as they grow older, and all of that kind of thing. But that's not the model we've got now. It's very, very difficult with the situation we have now. And unfortunately, a lot of people think that the big high-rise boom that's going on in Melbourne, or certainly the high-density apartment boom that's going on in Melbourne, is the solution to suburban sprawl, that it's the green thing to do. But unfortunately, it's not working out that way. Because most of the high-density development, which is meant to stop this sprawl, is extremely expensive. And the kind of people who would live in the outer suburbs can't afford to live in these places. Not only that, most of them are very, very tiny indeed. So you're looking at one bedroom maximum. Sometimes you've got studio apartments where they don't even have a separate bedroom. You just got to pull your bed down. So what it's actually doing is they're building these high density developments, and they're very, very cheaply built as well. They're very poor quality. So not only are they not actually aiming for the demographic who would live in the outer suburbs, but they're also got a shelf life of something like 40 years. You're going to have to start pulling these down. All that carbon that's going into that concrete.
It's rubbish.
You know? So we have a big problem. Now, that's not all bad. Some high density, if it's done well and it's properly located, can be a good thing. What we need is we need a mixture of different housing types. We need to create village-like communities so you have that diversity. But right now we've got this dichotomy of high-rise versus suburban sprawl. Now, one of the big things that's influencing this is our rapid rate of population growth. If you have a population growth like we have now in Melbourne, it's growing by 100,000 a year. Australia-wide, we're adding a new Adelaide every 3 years, a new Sydney less than every 15 years. And this population growth, make no mistake, it's GDP. It is population growth deliberately to increase GDP and increase the economy. But it's being used to justify. It's being used to justify the suburban sprawl model. And it's being used to justify the planning system that we have now. Because if your population is increasing at that kind of rate, building suburban sprawl is the fastest and quickest way of dealing with that housing demand. If you want to build smart communities, if you want to build, regenerate industrial land, regenerate land that was once used for other purposes, this is a more considered form of planning, and this takes time. If we want to increase densities in areas like the middle suburbs, if we want to do that well, these things take time. There's a development called Fisherman's Bend that's on the proposal in Melbourne. This development is very, very large. It's something like 50 hectares. It's a huge project, and many hours and months of planning has gone into it, and it's still not finalised. But this will actually absorb less than 1 year's worth of population growth in Melbourne. So looking at kind of regeneration schemes as being a way forward to deal with population growth is fine, but we have to get the right rate of population growth in order for that to happen. Otherwise, we end up with the situation that we have now, whereby we have the suburban sprawl continuing, we have the high-rise that's continuing, that's creating a gentrifying effect on the inner suburbs, which is pushing more people into the outer suburbs because people are being priced out. So ironically, in some ways, building high-rise, unless there's a component of affordable housing, unless there's many checks and balances in place, high-rise can actually increase suburban sprawl. So we need to completely rethink the picture. We need to take population out of the neoliberal paradigm. We need to start thinking about how can we create sustainable communities. We need to make sure that our infrastructure is in place before we increase the population. If we say, okay, look, we're going to have a massive increase in population, but we want to do it well, so therefore we're going to build new satellite regional towns along the V-line train line, and we're going to do this, we're going to do that. Well, that's fine. Let's have a conversation about how we can do that, and let's get that fully costed and in place first. Because the problem is, right now, there is no money in the pot for infrastructure. I see it very, very unlikely that we're going to get a situation whereby we can build new regional towns and all the things that may be more sustainable in the long run. And right now, there's so little money for infrastructure that our current infrastructure is buckling under the pressure of increased population growth. So we have train system and tram system that's at capacity, and yet we're putting more and more and more people in apartments closer to these areas, thinking that this infrastructure that wasn't designed for this kind of population can just keep taking it. So I suppose the points I want to say clearly here, the points that I'd like you to think about, is that population growth is as much about thinking about getting the infrastructure in place as it is about saying, oh, you know, we're a big country, we've got boundless plains. Well, we have boundless plains, but a lot of people are not living in those plains for many, many reasons. And if we want to if we want to stop focusing our population growth on a few small urban conurbations in Australia, like Melbourne and Sydney and the Gold Coast, and we want to start to look at habitating other areas, then we've really got to talk about these issues properly and get it all in place first. Otherwise it will just be default suburban sprawl, high-rise, and we're just going to get a worse and worse situation. We're going to lose our capacity to do permaculture because we're going to lose the green spaces, the food bowl. We're going to lose our biodiversity. The gardens of Melbourne, many of the large gardens in Melbourne that are very productive now, will be concreted over. So we've got to start thinking in a permaculture perspective and try and create a situation where, as the population grows, it grows at a rate so that we can create meaningful communities, and communities that can be sustainable in the very turbulent times we have ahead. And these are inclusive communities as well. You know, there's no agenda to me saying that we should slow population growth, other than the fact that I think that if we need to do it in a way that the communities we create are viable, so that we can have some kind of future that is progressive and meaningful for Australia as we face climate change. How am I doing for time? It's 12:16. We want to have questions at the end, so I might move over to Mark. Is there anyone make a quick point or anything they feel urgently they need to say at this stage from what I've said? Happy to answer. Yes, Sheila.
I'm wondering if you would speak on the motivation, on the interests of the property development growth lobby in population growth, the profit motive.
Yeah, well, there's a huge profit motive. The property developers are quite happy with the business as usual. Right now, they're getting away with building very poor quality, high density apartment developments, which, you know, I'm surprised there hasn't been a Four Corners investigation into this yet. Because as I said before, a lot of these only have a shelf life of 40 years. We have the cheapest materials possible, and these are being aimed at investors. They're not being aimed at places for people to live. It's a greenwash. It's like, oh, we're going to build high-rise because we're going to stop suburban sprawl. It's like, yeah, right. They're building high-rise because they want to get investors to buy them. And because people see them as places to invest in and they're not going to live there, the incentive isn't so much to increase the quality. And I know people who've moved into these apartments who said that within a couple of years, you know, they're falling apart on the inside. It's an absolute travesty. And then of course you've got developers who want to keep the model they're going with the suburban sprawl model. They've got their houses that they build. They don't particularly want to change the paradigm. So increasing the population, fast population growth, and poor planning, they're like a vicious circle. When I worked as a planner, I'd go to VCAT, and quite often, you know, there'd be applications would be turned down by a council, and the developer's argument would be, yeah, I know, ideally this isn't the best place to build this development, but you do know that Melbourne's population is going to double by 2040 something. And so therefore, you know, we've got to start building high density in areas where we wouldn't normally build it, because, you know, unless we're just going to sprawl outwards forever. But both are going to happen. So yeah, so there is, we've got to sort of understand that rapid population growth and developers who are making sure that they take control of the planning system, they're intertwined. You can't separate the two. And this is the point I'm trying to make. Any other questions before I pass over to Mark? Okay, we'll have more questions at the end. So I'd like to pass you over to Mark O'Connor.